So I think he's got a lot of options by virtue of really going the extra mile on the exterior side of it.
Yeah, like, let's get an address and we'll just show up unannounced.
Yeah, we got to do it. Field trip.
With a blower door.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Editorial Director Andrew Zellner.
Good morning.
Operations Manager for TDC Custom Construction, Ian Schwant.
Morning, Patrick.
And our producer, Jeff Rose.
Hello.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Well, gents, it's a pleasure to see you guys this morning. Thanks for being here.
Yep.
Always a pleasure.
Ian, don't keep me in suspense. Tell me about your trip to Belize. Let's start with how long you were there and what you thought about the place.
We were there for about a week. My wife and I went there as guests of her sister, who rented a beach house for her 40th birthday. And so we were down there with 6 other people, and we were there for a little over a week. I think 8 days we were there. But the most fun that I had was I opted not to go snorkeling with them because that's not really my jam. So I trespassed on a bunch of construction sites and looked at how people were doing different building work, and had a lot of fun doing that.
Tell me, what's different that you observed?
Just the masonry construction that they do is pretty interesting. I saw it a couple of different ways. One of the main ways that they were doing it was just standard concrete blocks, normal kind of basement style construction for a single story house. And it seemed to be up to the individual whether they carried that block work up the gable ends or built the whole roof structure stick framed wise. The most interesting block ones that I saw actually had like a concrete pier and beam design with block infill. I think I sent you guys some pictures of that we can put in the show notes, but that was the one that kind of blew me away.
Were they pouring while you were watching them?
A couple of them were,
yeah.
It's pretty extensive form work and all propped up with like sticks and other stuff that they found. It seemed like all the lumber I saw at any of the yards that I drove by was all pressure treated lumber.
I'm sure it's insects, right?
Yeah. But the couple things that I saw that I could get close enough to all had recognizable lumber stamps on them. So it didn't look any different really than the pressure treated.
The photo you sent us, it sure looked like a lot of hardwoods were in the lumber rack at the local yard. Is that true?
Yeah, there was. Yeah. I'm pretty sure I saw mahogany being used as concrete forms on the back of a truck and stuff like that.
That's the cheap stuff. It's the imported stuff that's expensive, right?
Yeah, every place that we went to, restaurant-wise, they all had like big mahogany bars and cabinets, and when we went into the jungle and did some hiking around, the guide's always pointing out the different mahogany trees and the mahogany trees that they historically keep for themselves and don't let loggers take and things like that. It's pretty cool.
That's cool. Well, another interesting you shared with us was like house kits that you saw that seemed, from our appearances, pretty affordable. You made the point that not everything was included, but can you talk about that a little? Yeah,
so the Belize has a Mennonite population that does prefab homes, and most of the regular American style carpentry is done by these Mennonites. But there was 2 that I found, both in the same area of Belize, but the one that I sent you actually had pricing, and I think it came down to like $25,000 for an 800 square foot house that they would deliver and put on posts for you so that it sits up off the ground. And I think all you would have to do is connect your plumbing and your electrical to it, and you've got a completed house for very little money.
Were you tempted?
A little bit. I kind of think that I could go down there and have a 4th act as a concrete block foreman, but the work hours there were I couldn't figure them out in the 1 week because the Sunday that we were there was tons of work going on, and then like Monday and Tuesday there was nothing.
Well, they
and
were
then Wednesday
tired,
there was
clearly.
work again. So that was interesting. But the other really cool thing was we went to a mountain village near one of the Mayan ruins, and you could see that, you know, the way that people would start a house, do the work that they had money for, move into part of it, and then, you know, start working on the next part adjacent to the house when they had the money. It was pretty cool to see. And I did a little bit of research, and the government will give you a land lease on the property, but you have to show progress with your build. So I think what a lot of people must do is just meet those progress goals to keep the land lease going. And then once you complete your house, I guess they sign the property over to you and you get title of ownership.
Cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah. Andrew, what have you been doing? Did you go any place exciting?
Just a couple of trips to Home Depot. So I've been slowly framing out my basement and, buying, 20 2x4s at a time. And the previous time I bought them, they were $8 a 2x4. Now they're $7 a 2x4, which is
Are
nice.
you stockpiling them because the prices are down in anticipation of a, rise?
I'm also a woodworker, and I went through this phase of like saving wood and like, stockpiling it for future projects. And then I was like, my wood shop is just full of wood and I can't make anything. So I'm more of a proponent of like, don't buy it unless you have something you're going to do with it in a very short time. The other thing is because our seasons are changing now, we sort of had a conversation, my girlfriend and I, about what projects should now take priority at the house and like where we need to do stuff. And so I think my basement project may be coming to a pause to tackle some more stuff above ground.
That seems appealing in the springtime, right? Who wants to be in the cave during the lovely spring weather?
Yeah.
Jeff, are you getting ready for spring?
A little bit, yeah. Not too much. I actually spent most of Sunday down in the basement, but
Working on your own cave space?
yeah, more or less, yeah.
Yep.
The freezer decided it didn't want to work anymore, so I'm kind of clearing a path to get a new one in.
That sounds like fun. What happened to all the stuff that was in there?
It was more just organization and like, breaking down the sawhorses and things like that didn't need to be there anymore.
I did a little, it's probably a stretch to call it decorating because you guys know me, but the upstairs of the barn is suddenly way more useful, and boy, is that satisfying. Carol made the observation that we're really good at finishing the project, but then kind of stop and never like hang any pictures or, like arrange any furniture. And I'm definitely not the right person to give advice on decorating or furnishings, but I will tell you two pieces of advice in this most recent part of the barn's evolution is that get unstuck with your furniture placement and just try some random stuff, and you'll be amazed like how much more you can like your furniture and your living space if you mix it up a little bit. And if you have boring walls, maybe hang a picture or two or some artwork. And it really makes a huge difference, especially when you have huge expanses of white drywall. We've been collecting WPA prints from the national parks. These were done in the 30s by artists to, promote Western tourism primarily. And they are so beautiful. And we've had these things in a pile, so we're starting to frame them and hang them up. And boy, is that awesome.
Are you building your own frames?
So, no. We're thinking about that, Ian. Do you know where to get the stuff? Because Ian and Carol in a past life, Ian was a framer by trade. So, do you know where to get the Lineals of frame stock?
It sure is hard to find, isn't it? I've had a couple of pieces that I tried to do online, and I think one online thing that I tried to buy some of the Lineal stuff at, they just never showed up. Like they charged me and I never got any of it.
You can pay an exorbitant amount for cuts, right? They'll pre-cut the frame, put it in a tube mailer and send it to you. But like trying to get the stock, we have a miter saw. It's not hard, right?
Yeah, I did one art show for a friend of mine that did some photography, and I remember it being just like this arduous slog to make all these frames and fit everything. And because he bought all the parts, and he and I tried to mount everything, and it was a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and I think you'd agree. Unlike finished carpentry, the stuff has to be perfect, right?
Yeah.
If
Yeah,
your
there's no
finished carpentry's
margin
off
of
a little
error.
bit, no one knows the difference. But if your
Right.
frame is off a little bit, it is super obvious.
Yeah.
So my last major tool purchase was maybe last year, so last spring. But I just had old habits die hard, just happened to be on Craigslist in the tool section, and somebody had listed a framing miter saw. So it actually has two heads on 45 degrees, like big 1 horsepower Baldur motors.
Made
and like
to cut frames all day, every day, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it was like $200, and I just like went and got it. And like my girlfriend's an artist and illustrator, and so I've made a bunch of frames and like did the table saw sled thing, but like once it's dialed in, it goes so much faster. But like the hard thing for me is like turning my 1 or 2 inch scraps of offcuts into frame stock is what takes forever. Yeah.
What brand of saw is that?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it was like one of the 2 framing saw manufacturers out there. It's probably like 30 years old, and I need to get a new. There's like a grid graphic thing for laying out your frames that was pretty beat up, but I was. So now I guess I have 3 miter saws in my garage, and 2 of them are fixed at 45
I think
degrees.
you only need a couple more, and you'll be all set, Andrew. That's what I
Yeah,
would say.
two
Yeah.
more should do it.
Yeah, we don't need to be able to change the bevels on our miter saw. If you need a new bevel, just get another miter saw.
Yeah. Do you have like one that can cross cut like 13 or 14 inches, like the big
I
skill
think
one?
my slider maxes out at like 12 and a half, but yeah.
Do
I
you
also
have a
went
radio
down,
arm saw, Ian?
No, all I have is that giant skill miter saw. That was one of the first things you gave me to write a review on, and used it to build the house and used it in workshop stuff. It's a really great saw.
I tried to get you a heavier one, but there wasn't one available.
You specifically told me you didn't want it back because it was too heavy.
It's heavy. So those of you who listen to the podcast regularly will remember our conversations with Chris, who was considering building his own home in upstate New York, and he writes in with an update. Greetings, FHB crew. I just wanted to take a minute and update you all. A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I were meeting with our builder, and he shared some numbers that made my eyes pop out of my head. We spent a couple weeks trying to make the math work. In the end, we couldn't do it, so we abandoned our plans to build. It was an excruciating decision, but in the long term, it makes more financial sense. In total, the failed experiment will cost us money, but I have to say that it wasn't a complete waste. Engaging in the planning process has changed the way I view and understand homes on a number of different levels. Understand the home as a system, acknowledging that carbon embodied materials, not just emissions, recognizing the difference between temperature and comfort, just to name a few. So I know my experience as a homeowner will be much different moving forward after having gone through this effort. Speaking of being a homeowner, after making the final decision to give up on building our own home, I turned, as many do, to doom scrolling on Zillow. I came across this property. My wife and I viewed the house this morning and put in an offer and have signed a contract. Although we won't be sticking with the eternal blue theme for long, the home has many of the qualities we've been looking for, including in our design home. We think it is the embodiment of pretty good for us. It was built in 2018 on a 2.5 acre double lot. It has a 42,000 BTU 5-zone Mitsubishi mini split heat pump system. Awesome. Before I put in my bid, I ran the numbers through the energy model spreadsheet Ian helped me with, and the system seems to be sized correctly. Thanks, Ian. The house runs off municipal electricity, which currently charges a measly 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Sweet. The blower door test in 2019 showed 1.34 air changes per hour. Not so bad. It has mechanical ventilation of some sort, though I need to get up in the attic to check out to see exactly what kind of unit they have running. I could go on, but I'll stop myself. I just wanted to share a twist in our journey and also thank the entire collective crew, past and present, of the FHB podcast. I've learned a lot and will continue to do so. all while thoroughly enjoying the various content you all produce. Take care, Chris. Binghamton, soon to be Green, New York, still Zone 6A. I'm sad for Chris that he can't build his new house, but I'm super happy he got something that is going to work for him at less cost. That seems smart, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, all the interactions that I had with him, and I spent an hour on Zoom with him going over that energy model spreadsheet and some other budgeting stuff. He strikes me as a massively practical individual. So I'm not surprised that he went this route.
So the blower door test is something that's been in my mind lately. And I know it's, super common in new build and high performance builds, but like, Patrick, have you ever done a blower door test on your home?
Yes, I have. And the results alarmed me enough that I never did it again, Andrew.
Okay.
I think I was beyond 6 air changes. I know I was. I didn't know if it was 6.5, but it was definitely more than 6, which means even in the warmest parts of the country, my house is a big fail. And I don't know exactly what's going on there. Folks have asked me about that. I can tell you I could actually hear ripping through my oil burners flue when we were doing the test, right? Mm-hmm. And so I don't know enough to know if that's a realistic test, because that wouldn't enter into it in a normally atmospheric situation. But, what do you think, Andrew? Are you thinking of doing yours?
I'm thinking of doing mine, but especially because I think it's the Minneapolis blower door, the manufacturer's in South Minneapolis.
We should tell you, Jeff is the winner of our Excellence in Air Sealing Award amongst the podcast hosts and staff, right? So
not anymore now that Ian's involved.
Oh, Ian, right. He had to ruin it for all of us.
Yeah, he skewed all the numbers.
I shouldn't count, though. I was really going for it, and I still haven't had him back here to do the final yet. But
Jeff, you were under 3, right?
Right around 3, yeah.
Yeah.
So my house was built in 1906, and it was moved to a new foundation in the 20s, and I'm sure it's leaky as all get out. And so part of it is a morbid curiosity, but part of it is are there things I should be doing to seal it up more than I'm doing, or are all the things I'm doing basically what I would be doing anyway,
Well, I'm hoping we have a listener in your area, Minneapolis or St. Paul, that's got a blower door that wants to come test your house, because I think you really have to, share your numbers with the podcast audience and the rest of us.
Share them. He should live stream it. Live stream the blower door, and you can be walking around with the smoke stick and seeing where your leaks are. You could have the smoke stick in one hand and a can of foam in the other.
So is the in a existing house build, what are the things you actually get to seal before, talking about flues and
okay, so you're supposed
and
to close and bolt all your exterior doors, close and lock all your windows. You're supposed to turn off all ventilating equipment and combustion appliances. The latter is more for combustion safety than airtightness. I think that's it. Am I forgetting anything, Ian?
Plug the drains. If you don't have water,
blower door will suck air right through your pipes.
Yeah, so you've got to plug your drains.
Okay, well, so as soon as heating season is over, so it's probably 3 more months for me, but we can...
We're not going to let you put it off that long, I'm sure. All right, folks, you heard it. So Andrew needs to come up with a blower door test so we can, have a critical analysis, the emphasis being critical.
Absolutely.
This comes from Dack. Hello, podcast guys and gal. I just listened to number 443 when Ian suggested panelizing. Ian, could your company move towards panelization be accomplished with panels? I'm not in the industry, but SIPs seems like an obvious solution, veering towards no-brainer. Mark LaLiberte and Justin Wilson, the construction instruction guys, are both big fans, and Steebrook wrote a book about them. That's good enough for me. I'm working on a small cottage project with a Minneapolis-based timber framer. It's only 900 square feet, but the estimate to have a frame cut, erected, and enclosed in SIPs, and a 5-man crew to drive from Minnesota to northern Wisconsin and back and spend 5 days putting it up is $80K. Granted, it's missing a lot of things like a foundation, but it seems like an affordable, fast way to get stylish, durable, high R value shelter. In fact, I see an opportunity here. Automate the labor-intensive timber framing piece. Germans have already done this, and he has a link to a German timber framing manufacturer, and we actually have a video of that German machinery on our Fine Homebuilding website too. Enclosed in SIPs, offer consumers a range of combinable modules, which is, he has another link here to the Backcountry Hut Company. The roofs are PV ready for net zero. Let's save the planet and solve the housing shortage in style. Who's with me? Yeah. What do we think about SIPs?
So, I think we've touched on SIPs before in the podcast, and one of the things I've been thinking more about when I think in terms of the sustainability is how long houses last, and also like how you can repair them, because they will fail, not through just of their own design, but like there are natural disasters, there are repairs that need to be made, and SIPs seem not super repair friendly.
Not nearly as redundant at a minimum than say a light timber, light wood frame structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Plus, they have to be installed absolutely perfectly, which was my response to Dack, to keep them from needing any of those repairs that Andrew's talking about.
We've known a number of failures. Juneau, Alaska is like a textbook case because of the short building season. They used these to get people in houses, and they weren't detailed correctly. Specifically, the seams between panels were not air sealed, so warm interior moist air would get to the outside that was taped and then condense there and then drip back in the building and make for a big mess, right? It made a lot of damage, and it's, as you both have alluded to, hard to fix.
Yeah.
But also, like I love the idea of a timber frame, but you probably don't even need the timber frame to build a house out of SIPs, right? So like we could save some money.
You considered them for your build, right, Ian?
I did, yeah, until I did more research on it and kind of landed on the things that Andrew brought up. I plan on living in this house a long time, and I'm likely going to have to do repairs to it, and things will fail. And everything for me was about making it as straightforward to work on in the future and build as possible.
What about Dack's suggestion that it's maybe a good fit for your company to speed things along and automate some of the framing that is, subject to weather, what have you?
We're looking at a lot of different panelized options. We have one building material supply place that also has a component manufacturer that will panelize, and we've done some second floor additions with them already. We're talking to them about another one. Our director of design also spoke to a couple of high performance panel manufacturers. The pricing probably will not work for us. I think it's about 3x over a standard site built wall.
What? Why?
I'm not sure yet. I haven't had a chance to really dig into what their spec is, but they were running about 300 a linear foot plus shipping.
But you have to take out the fact that you don't have to insulate it. You know,
these
right?
did not come with cavity insulation. They only came with exterior
Interesting.
insulation. So, but I think there's a lot of thought process work to be done on high performance panel stuff to get it at least to a point where it's efficient to erect, but also not overly costly to the final client.
It seems like I see more panel systems going in sort of commercial, multifamily, buildings.
Modules too. Yeah.
Is that just like an economy of scale and speed?
I think
thing?
so. I think
Okay.
so.
Yeah. I think it's an economy of scale, and it allows you not to have specialty trades to do the framing. So if you can get something in a module and have it set, or panels that can be set by any laborer that you have on staff, that's a big win for a large commercial project.
I know, like, of course, a great percentage of the cost of building with modules is the crane and the setup of that, right? If you have an enormous building, that some of those costs are reduced per unit.
Right, 'cause you have to have it anyway. If you're building a 4-story building the size of a city block, you're going to have a tower crane, and you're going to have a lot of other heavy equipment that you wouldn't otherwise have on a residential site.
Kenneth from YouTube had some thoughts on our advice to Jesse in episode 449. Jesse was wondering about a door between his master bedroom and bath. Kenneth suggests, how about a contemporary barn door, minimal trim, easier to create a custom size? The only drawback is the door and door hardware would need to extend off the wall to match the depth of the decorative column. Yeah, I think that's the only snafu there. You just need to pad the track out.
Making sure that you get the right track, because that opening went all the way to the ceiling, if I remember right from the picture. So you would have to get like a ceiling mounted track, I think, to make that work.
The other hiccup with those sliding barn doors is they're not good at stopping sound. So if your aim is to, isolate the bath from noise, I don't think that's going to work. A question comes from Brian. Wall humidity monitoring. We're finishing a portion of our basement, and I am curious if you or anyone on the show / audience has found a DIY / homeowner budget-friendly way to monitor humidity in a wall assembly. I know consumer hygrometers aren't super well calibrated, but after finding an old terrarium hygrometer I had lying around, I was wondering if this would help discover if there was any dramatic changes inside wall assemblies, specifically my laundry room. My DIY thought was basically to drill a hole in the drywall and snake the probe through and leave it in the wall in a place I would see when doing laundry, but I didn't want to reinvent the wheel if there's a better way to do this without doubling the cost of a wall. Specifically, I'm worried about the dryer vent. It's going to be buried in the wall, and I believe I've covered my bases with a short run. It's 12 foot or so, and all the seams are screwed, taped, and clamped, and then using a full 2x6 wall so the vent isn't being compressed to fit through 4-inch cavities. But I am still terrified of the disasters I'm still terrified of the disasters I have seen with these vents causing issues in walls. Anyway, thanks again for all that you guys do with the show. It's been a huge source of help and motivation to keep getting my 56 Cape back into fighting shape after the previous owner let things go for about a decade. Brian. Brian, I'm going to say for starters, you probably shouldn't be using screws to fasten your duct work together with a dryer, because it traps lint and hair and can actually make it occlude more quickly. So aside from that all sounds good. Any thoughts on the hygrometer monitoring system here?
So I did sort of a dive into the world of Arduinos and Raspberry Pi computers, and
you should tell what our listeners of a certain age what Arduino is. Andrew?
So basically they're cheap, inexpensive computers, and by cheap we're talking tens of dollars. And they're open source, and they're highly modifiable. And it turns out you can get all kinds of different sensors for them, that are also tens of dollars. And so if you're a DIYer and you have any inclination toward circuits and computers, it's so like I've got a friend who's a electrical engineer by trade, and he's done all kinds of built his own electricity monitoring devices out of Arduinos and sensors and circuits, and 3D printed enclosures for him and stuff. And it's probably more of a hobby than a thing you just do once and stick a sensor in your wall. But it seemed like one of the most affordable ways I could find to do it. But the other thing is that, because the sensors aren't necessarily well calibrated out of the box, finding your base and calibrating them and not relying them on for hard data, but more trends is the other piece of advice I found when using cheap sensors.
Ian, what do you think about this plan?
I've come across 2 guys in my career that do exactly what Andrew's talking about with the Arduinos and little probes and for different humidity monitoring and high performance houses. So I think it comes down to, can he calibrate that to where it's going to give him any kind of data, but the range data over time is also really valuable.
I can practically hear the listeners screaming at their device right now. There are these devices out there. They're not. There's nothing special. It's a hobo data logger, and it costs like tens of dollars itself, and it's already calibrated and programmed to do all this stuff, right?
Right. But I guess I'm wondering, is this a new construction, application for him? I mean, he says he's finishing a portion of the basement, so
he's willing to drill holes in the wall. So right?
So then you've got the hobo ones, and even Wagner, the moisture meter company. They make a smart logger that I think has almost a 1-year battery life on it too. That is a direct connect to an app from Wagner, just like the hobo ones.
But just buying something off the shelf, guys, is that any fun?
So I've dated myself before, so I don't feel like I'm revealing anything. But I remember like the kits you got from Radio Shack, or and like if you wanted to make your own computer, which I don't know what it did. It like flashed at a little LED diode and a sequencer or whatever. But yeah, if you're the kind of person that likes to tinker with electronics, I say have at it. If you want to get some reliable data and get on with your life, I'd say buy a hobo data logger.
Right.
Okay. You know what time it is. It's time for a commercial break. We'll be right back after this message from our sponsor. If you run a home service business like painting, contracting, lawn care, or cleaning, your to-do list is endless. From hiring staff to mountains of paperwork, not to mention doing the actual work that pays the bills. Jobber is a mobile and online app that helps you organize your business and look professional. With Jobber, you can quote jobs, schedule your crew, invoice, and get paid all in one place. Try it free today at getjobber.com/finehomebuilding. Finishing your basement is the fastest and least expensive way to add living space and value to your home. And to do it right, you'll need basement doors and egress window wells. Bilco basement doors and window wells add light, ventilation, and code-compliant emergency egress to lower-level living areas, making them as warm, safe, and comfortable as any room in the home. Basement doors are available with a factory-applied powder coat paint and finish in a number of standard colors to complement any home. To learn how to get more out of your basement with Bilco products, visit bilco.com. All right, our next question comes from Alex. Hello, podcast crew. I was wondering if you guys would approve of my using pine paneling on the walls of my barn with no drywall or other vapor/air/whatever barrier behind it. Here are the circumstances. It is a 130-year-old balloon frame structure in Western Mass. It was falling apart when I bought it, and I have gradually fixed the framing, re-sided, added doors and windows, and I'm basically turning it into a workshop/cabin/teenagers hangout. Building code, doesn't really apply. From now, I heat it only when I'm there with a wood stove. I am gradually insulating it one wall at a time with cobbled rigid foam, mineral wool, or whatever I find cheap. I have then found myself covering it with tongue and groove pine, or in the case of my kid space upstairs, rough sawn pine 1x. All the while, in the back of my head, hearing segments from past episodes of the podcast where you guys talk about water problems in homes with pine paneling from the warm, moist interior air seeping through gaps in the boards and condensing on cold framing. It sounds like a horror story, doesn't it? Is this something I really have to worry about in the semi-inhabited structure? Though I don't heat it full time, I can imagine someday having some sort of heat source that keeps it around 60 degrees or so. There will never be any running water or significant cooking going on there, and it will never be inhabited full time. What do you think? Is there some sort of easy barrier I should be using behind the pine? Alex. Well, this sounds like an awesome project, right? Making what was a falling down structure into a cool getaway space. What's the risk here, team?
I'm inclined to not worry about it.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all inclined to not worry about it.
Right,
Jeff, are you worried?
Not really, no.
And why are we not worried?
Because it's not really a house. It's not a living space. It lacks the other
It's
systems.
unconditioned, I think, is the real bottom
It
line
seems
here.
like there's still fantastic drying potential if it does
Yes.
get wet.
I would say one thing, Alex, if you're using mineral wool, you need some kind of air barrier because it's so air permeable. If it's not going to behave as insulation unless you're doing something to stop air movement through it. So short of that, I think you're doing amazing here.
I'm wondering what he did for the exterior, if it's sheathed or if if the siding itself is acting as the sheathing, which would be pretty common of
A barn of this
floor
era,
and
right?
framed barn in Western Mass.
I think because it's, as Andrew says, unlimited drying potential practically. We don't have a lot of moisture loading from the interior. You're only trying to keep it conditioned when you're running the, wood stove. And you can make a lot of heat with a wood stove.
I think Alex has got to send us some pictures because I bet this is a pretty cool project.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Please, Alex. Alex, rest easy. Question 3 comes from Perry in Duluth, Minnesota. It seems appropriate. We have our upper Midwesterners here on the show today. Perry says, I have a sewage pump that pumps discharge from our basement washer, laundry sink, and bathroom into our septic tank. After it stops pumping, the toilets and sink gurgle throughout the house. This gurgling doesn't happen with our main floor bathroom or sinks, which gravity feed to our septic system. Is this a venting issue? So can one of you guys explain what this thing is Perry has in his basement that's draining his laundry tray and basement bathroom?
I'll take a shot at it because I did the same thing in my old house.
Cool.
So I had the same thing, washer, was on the first floor, but I couldn't get enough pitch to where it needed to go. So I just ran it straight down into the basement. I think our dishwasher was hooked up to it as well. But I started off with a small, like under cabinet sewer pump, like something that you would just put in a basement bath. And it's a crock like the size of a bucket with a motor in it that pumps the effluent out into your main.
And there's a grinder in there, which we don't really want to talk about what that's about, but yeah. So
Well, it can if you spend the money on one with a grinder,
Yeah.
which I did not and regretted. I opted
which we
not
don't want to talk about.
I opted not to fix it. I opted to just throw it out and buy a different one once it got to a point. But the one that I bought to replace this small under counter unit was like a full-sized 40-gallon real sewer pump that could actually pump, from your toilet if you had it hooked up to it. And what I noticed was I had this same problem with my smaller unit because I couldn't vent it well enough, but I didn't have that problem with the large 40-gallon one, which was able to vent with, normal 2-inch PVC pipe. So my guess is he's got a venting issue.
Why does it affect the other bathrooms and not the ones on the first floor is the part that I'm finding confusing.
I was confused too because it did the same thing for us. It would gurgle the shower, even though the shower wasn't hooked up to it, and it would gurgle I think it did the kitchen sink, which was hooked up to it. So yeah, I don't
Proximity
know.
a factor, Ian? Do you think?
What was that, Patrick?
Was proximity? Were these bathrooms that were
Probably.
affected were closer
Yeah.
to the grinder?
They were closer to it or on it, so that the proximity of it could have something to do with it as well.
I got to looking at the schematic diagrams this morning on Google Images to see what exactly is inside one of these, and I was guessing that there was a check valve. And
Right.
It seems like, Jeff, you're nodding your head.
Yep.
What do you know about this?
Well, I've replaced them, so yeah, I know there's a check valve, and I think that's probably what's going on. Is that when the pump shuts off, that whatever's in the pipe will settle, and I think it's drawing air from wherever it can.
Man.
So as it settles in the pipe back to the check valve, it creates that vacuum that then pulls the air back.
From the rest of the house, yeah.
Perry, I think that's a good place to start. I asked Mike Lombardi, our favorite plumber, what he thought about this. I have not heard back from him, but I'll report what I learned from him.
So is the fix moving the check valve? So as much not as much water settles back, or
I would guess. I would think that there should be some venting somewhere. It could be possible that there's a clogged vent line, or
I think a call to Sandyflow or whoever makes your pump, Perry, would also be a worthwhile thing, because my guess is they've heard this, right? And plumbers even have little experience with this stuff oftentimes, so they're going to call Sandyflow when they need to service one of these, and I bet they're going to have an answer for you. And Mike Lombardi might too. So,
and these pumps are really useful, especially when you're doing remodeling work and you can't actually get the pitch right, or can't get a bathroom in some area. They're a really useful DIY tool, I believe.
Yeah, and they're all different sizes, and some of them are, super easy to install. It looks like it's just, it is a great solution. And I think one of the important factors is that septic systems, when they release their effluent close to the surface, is way more effective than if it comes out way deep underground. So you don't want your septic line to be going out way deep in the basement or under, the floor, for that matter. Oh boy, this is the question I've been waiting for all day. This comes from Hans. It's a long one, so bear with me, folks. Good afternoon, Fine Homebuilding crew. I've been a listener since I bought my fixer-upper house 3 years ago, when I stumbled upon the podcast while trying to figure out how to fix the ice damming problem we were having. Little did I know that discovery of Fine Homebuilding and subsequently Green Building Advisor would take me down a never-ending path of fixing my house, not just for energy efficiency, but structurally as well. It is kind of never-ending, isn't it, folks? My house is an early 1900s small Cape Cod in Zone 6 in central Wisconsin that has been added on to a few times over the years. When we first moved in, it was poorly insulated and air-sealed. Think gable vents for the knee walls with no insulation in the floor. Asbestos shingle siding that was falling off in places. What we thought would be small changes on our way to quickly reselling the place has turned into fully reframing and resheathing the house due to rot, and deciding to go all in and do a chainsaw retrofit and full exterior insulation, all the while living in the house while we do the work. You can see the attached photos for some of our extensive renovations. This is a freaking impressive project. I think you would agree. He says, on to my question. This question isn't going to have the typical answer you usually give to these type of roof insulation questions, exterior insulation, as I have already gone ahead with that part of the project. Rather, I am looking for some insight on how to best insulate the interior side of the roof without creating an ill-performing or risky assembly in terms of moisture. I am re-roofing and adding dormers, 1 shed and 2 gable dormers to the house, with the assembly structure as follows. He has a drawing of his assembly. My plan is to beef up the old spliced 2x4 rafters to 2x12s, add Grace ice and water shield over the old board sheathing as an air barrier, wrap down onto the walls, have 2 layers of 2-inch polyiso rigid insulation, 2x material on top for an airspace for the applied overhangs, and then a second floor deck with shingles as the roof covering. A profile of this assembly is attached, along with a few other photos of the work. To address some previous podcast discussions on finding people to do this type of work, I didn't have too much trouble finding a contractor to do the exterior insulation, as I am rather ambitious, aka cheap, and I am doing all the work myself with the help of family and friends. Hans, you got some good friends, is what I will say. My question is based upon reading some articles on Green Building Advisor regarding combining rigid insulation and fluffy insulation and building a cathedral ceiling that works. The dilemma: the 2 layers of polyiso give me roughly R25, which is about the minimum for my climate zone and should make up about 50% of the insulation compared to the fluffy insulation. That would result in about 6.5 inches of fluffy insulation. Since I'm using 2x12 framing, I would only be filling the rafter bays half full. From what I understand, is not going to make the batt insulation very effective. I will be using wafer lights, as well as potentially running a few pieces of ductwork in the rafter bays, if that changes any suggestions. So in general, the question is, how should I detail the interior insulation to not make a risky assembly? My current thought is to partially fill the bay with insulation, then use a smart membrane against the insulation taped to the rafters to add an interior air barrier against the insulation. And to answer another question you may have been thinking as you read all of this, yes, I am an engineer. Thanks in advance for the answers you may provide, as well as for inspiring myself as well as others to take on these kinds of house projects in an effort to make our homes better than they were. Hans. Well, Hans, I can think of no greater compliment than to do a deep energy retrofit on your roof based on our guidance.
I took one look at his nice drawing of what his assembly was and went, "This guy's an engineer."
I'm also
He's doing
curious,
everything right.
Yeah,
Right?
I'm curious where he is in central Wisconsin, because I grew up in central Wisconsin. So
You and I are both not far from central Wisconsin,
Yeah.
so I think we got to go out and see this one. I think
got to do a
Hans has gotta-
podcast field trip. We'll do a live podcast from Hans's house.
Oh my
think
God, that would be
Hans has
so
got it.
awesome. We could have him on.
Yeah.
Yep. Hans has got to
man.
get us his address because I bet Andrew and I are both no more than 3 hours from this guy.
Yeah, I'm betting he's like parents with my or neighbors with my parents.
I'm dazzled, Hans. You're doing everything right, near as I can tell. I looked up the code requirements in the IRC, and we're talking about provisions 806.5, which talks about combining rigid insulation and fibrous insulation in unvented assemblies, is what we're getting at here, right? And nobody ever does this. They never want to go to the trouble or expense of putting the insulation on the top. But that's the right way to do this.
So could he fill the entire rafter bay with fluffy insulation?
Sure.
I think that's what I would do.
I was thinking like the labor of doing it in between the bays is like the thing that bummed me out. And, you know, the extra insulation costs maybe if you're blowing it in instead of doing bats with the smart membrane, you know.
He has an uninterrupted R25, which is
Yeah.
way more than any of us can say, right? Maybe
Yeah.
with the exception of Ian.
No,
you know.
I have the spray foam R25 under my roof deck. So, I mean, he's doing better than I did.
Yeah. So, I mean, like the risk really goes down because you have not created a condensing surface, right? And if you're really worried about it, I think you understand that the way to deal with this is vapor control on the underside of the rafters. And I think a smart vapor retarder is a good idea because you're not going to have any drying potential through the ice and water shield, especially in your 4 inches of polyiso insulation.
One thought that I had, Patrick, was if he talked about some duct work and some wafer lights and things that would have to go in there. He could use an undersized craft-faced bat, which then you could staple up inside the rafter bay, and that would give him that little bit of room for some duct work and the wafer lights, and then you'd sort of have a vapor barrier, vapor retarder because of the craft face bat.
And they're pretty forgiving with regard to drying. So if you do have some
Yeah.
incidental moisture from, you know, an unusual humidity event or whatever, it will allow drying to the interior, unlike some, like poly, for example, which
Right.
will never dry.
Right. So I think he's got a lot of options by virtue of really going the extra mile on the exterior side of it.
Yeah, like let's get an address and we'll just show up unannounced.
Yeah, I think we got to do it. Field trip.
With a blower door.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hans, I think you're going to be just fine. And anyone who's willing to live in a project while you're going to this very invasive air sealing and insulation measures, I would say you're going to be just fine.
Yeah, I think a live podcast from there is in order.
Wouldn't that be fun?
That'd be super fun.
Well, I love hearing from our listeners. Please, folks, write in with your suggestions to other questions or your own questions or suggestions for products that are good for air sealing or insulating or what, you know. We love to hear from you. It's the best part of the show. I think you all would agree. Yeah. We have some exciting things coming up, right, Andrew? We have a deck building class being done by our own Justin Fink, right?
Yeah, so I think it launches at the end of May, but it's a premium learning course, and so there's a bunch of videos and content to consume over the course of a couple of weeks, and then you get to talk with Justin, and he'll answer your questions. And especially, you know, we're coming up on deck building season, and so we're pretty excited about it. It's our first premium learning course, but we've got more on the way too. So we'll leave a link in the show notes.
The aspect where you get to ask, it's live, right? The Q&A section.
It's a live Q&A. It's like, so Patrick, it's like a podcast, except somebody asks the questions in real time.
And someone who knows the answers gives.
Yeah. It's not like a podcast.
Ian, what's going on in your life? What's coming up either at work or on the homestead?
Well, I think I've got a webinar I'm doing with you, right? On LVLs and some other
PSLs and
things like that, which I'm looking forward to being able to kind of explain why I chose to use LSLs for all the framing members on my house. Otherwise, on the back end of getting back from the tropics, we decided to pull the trigger on turning our large southeast facing deck into a screen porch.
Because your climate is so similar to Belize, you'd figure you'd take advantage of the lovely weather,
exactly.
right?
All that great warm weather we get here in south central Wisconsin. Really, no, it's the bugs. And I was actually surprised by how few bugs there were in the part of Belize that we were in, and there are just a ton of bugs here. So I pulled the trigger. I think Screenease is delivering me all of my material tomorrow. So we'll see.
Can you explain that? So they're like plastic tracks, right, that have a spline that snaps in, right?
Yeah, I think it's an aluminum track with a vinyl or plastic cap that compresses the screening material into it. But yeah, we're gonna do the whole 10 by 45 rear deck, turn it into a screen porch. So
we should do a live podcast from there too.
No kidding.
Jeff would really need to be on top of the vulgarity editing and the beeping, I think. I did this once with Andy on a project in Pauling when he and I both worked for HVP, and I didn't get to work on the screening part. I just framed the porch with him. But I remember him talking about how impressed he was with that Screenease material. So Sarah and I are gonna give it a try.
Tell me, what do you do about the floor, right? Presumably you have some kind of deck board with spaces in it. Do you have to put screen under there too?
I'm going to do screening on the underside because we never finished the patio below our deck. So I'm just going to screen that and then do some kind of cover over the screen. I haven't decided what that's going to be yet, but it'll just be the stapled up screen for now.
Is there a screen shortage like there is so many building materials right now, Ian?
It didn't seem to be. I had tons of different screen that I could pick from. And one thing that I will point out to anybody else who wants to do this is screen cost from manufacturer to manufacturer and website to website is huge. You
mean the difference is?
The difference, yeah. I nearly purchased it from one website and checked another, and the screen was like half the price, and the screen is maybe, I think the material runs me about $1,500 to do this project, and the screen is, over half of it. So
fiberglass, aluminum, something else. What is the?
It's some composite material. I'd have to get you the exact specs on it when I get it, but I was surprised it's all like a nylon base with some kind of coating on it.
And how, do you have to do infilling of your deck rails and stuff, or you already had a roof there and
we already have a roof there, so it's really just a matter of building some kind of frame on the inside of our deck rails. A lot of people do it on the exterior. It's a second floor deck, so I'm just going to do it on the interior for ease of install and inevitable future maintenance. But the Screenease is pretty cool. I'll be able to I think stretch almost 12 feet with it, so I'll be able to have an unobstructed 12-foot by 7-foot panel.
That is going to be an awesome space in the evenings. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was really what made us want to do it, was the nighttime sitting outside, and we put ceiling fans in the deck already, so it's going to make it a really nice space once it's screened in, and the patio door can just be open to the inside for the 2 or 3 weeks of the year where you don't have to heat or cool your house in Wisconsin. As Andrew knows well about, you get like a week and a half in spring, and then you get another week and a half in fall.
we had a couple 60-degree days this weekend, and it was just like I opened one window for like 20 minutes, and then I was like, I don't want to push this.
Yeah, we had our windows open yesterday, and Sarah closed them, and I was like, "What'd you close the windows for?" She's like, "I'm getting cold." And it's like, "Oh yeah, the sun's going down."
Right. So what are your overnight temperatures if you're getting to 60s in the daytime sometimes?
30s and 40s.
Yeah.
It's still winter.
Yeah.
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 It's only April. Come on.
Right.
Of course, it's still winter here yet.
We have daffodils and crocuses coming up, right, Jeff?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're supposed to hit 70 today.
Wow.
I got to go. I'll see you guys later. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Ian, Andrew, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us. However, listening it helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Happy building. Happy spring.